Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and today is a special day for me because today I have a guest who I think has probably impacted my thinking, impacted my way of thinking about theology and the world and ministry and all those kind of things as much as anybody aside from my father, and has probably contributed to my personality more than anyone outside of my immediate family. And that person is my former youth pastor, James Davis, Dr. James Davis, or as I affectionately know him as JD Coach Davis.
You know, you're the only person that calls me coach. When I answer the phone and the words are, "Hey, coach," I know immediately who it is. Even if I didn't have caller ID, I'd know exactly who it was.
Yeah, I don't want anyone else to have that sort of a relationship with you. If your
Nobody
son has
does.
it, that's
You're
fine.
safe.
I get
You're
it. That's
safe.
your son. Yeah. But I started calling my current pastor coach a little bit. It just kind of happened organically. So I'm thinking it's like in the Braxtonian lexicon, it's like a term for, it's like bishop, presbyter.
Oh,
coach.
okay. So it's biblical.
Yeah, it's like a biblical thing. It's like a biblical thing.
I like the term Braxtonian lexicon. That's a pretty good terminology there.
We've got a lot of things in them, but man, it is so good to see you, JD. And I'm
glad it's great to
see
you.
I've always wanted to have you on the show, and so we're going to talk about some stuff that's important that's going on in the culture right now that the church is having to face.
Sure.
Before we do that, it is important to me. I mean, one of the reasons that I initially wanted to have you on, obviously, I care about the church in these trying times, but I wanted a good reason to have you on because you were my youth pastor, and you were my youth pastor during the period of time where I felt. Now, people hear me talk about this. You can confirm this, that I wasn't looking like to be in ministry. That wasn't like my goal. My goal was I wanted to be Bono, right?
Yes, you had a great affinity for Bono. I think you still have a special place in your heart for U2. So that that was pretty much your primary goal right there were all things related to U2 all the way up the ladder to Bono. Yeah.
Yeah, so much so that I'm going to tell this story, and some people who've watched the video I have that gives my testimony have heard this already. But JD, it's a jerk move to have someone on your show and then you talk about yourself. But you're a part of this story, and so we were on the last night of a mission trip. But don't imagine anything exotic like we're in Belize or something. We are in Grand Rapids, Michigan, right?
The outer edge of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Yeah.
And we had been building this baseball diamond for this little poor church up there. And the last night, our youth group was fighting with each other. And you said, basically, everyone just bow your head and close your eyes. I don't even care if you really pray or not. I just don't want you to argue anymore. So just shut up and bow your head and close your eyes was basically the message. And
I was pretty frustrated trying to make a spiritual moment, and it kind of blended the two. Yeah.
Yeah, because what we were doing at that particular time, I happen to remember, because it's so ironic, we were trying to think of the best, most spiritually powerful way to present to the church back home all the ways God has impacted us here on this mission trip. And yet we're yelling and throwing and spitting and hissing at each other.
It looked like a regular Baptist business meeting, but that was it.
That's right. That's what it was. We trained him young. So anyway, that was going on. We were having that, and you told everyone shut up and bow your head and close your eyes. Well, it's not because I was a good kid, because I had my own issues. But on this particular night, I wasn't a part of that arguing. And so when you told us to bow our heads and close your eyes, I prayed, and I was sitting on the front inside row. And I it's not as though I can't oversell this and say it's as though it was the case that I was thinking about, is God calling me to ministry? But I was very sure in my own mind, I didn't think I wanted that really. But at this particular moment, because it was way after this that I came and kind of worked for you. In this particular moment, I didn't want this, but I was praying and I said, God, if this is really something you want for me and you don't want me to be Bono, I probably didn't say it like that, but if this is really something you want for me, then you're going to have to make it like really like almost like too obvious to be, too specific. Well, I opened my eyes, and there on the communion table, as in many churches, it said, "This do in remembrance of me." Well, I'm not like a real mystical guy. And yeah, like they all say that, but I wasn't like planning this. And when I looked up and saw it, it was like, okay, well, I don't really know how I can doubt that too much. So I went to you, and I remember telling you, you were at the other end of the pew from me, and God knows what you were thinking about at that moment with all these kids. But I said, I think I'm being called into the gospel ministry. I think that's what I'm experiencing right now. And it's kind of bittersweet because I'm not the most happy person about it. And we went after that to like Denny's or something and sat up all night talking about it. And it was really, I wasn't like super thrilled, but that was the thing. And you were there for that.
Yeah, I think I was sitting on the other end of the pew going, I really need to try to make this a spiritual moment, but I really don't know what to do. So God, you're going to have to do something. And in that moment, you came forward and started to wrestle with this. There were several other people that in the youth group who were making it was a powerful moment where God really began to move in a lot of, that group's lives. And it was one of those, it was one of those milestone moments that you go back to. And, if I could find that church again, I mean, we could go back, and if everything was there, you'd go back and go, this is it. I mean, this is the place where you
it was just a few
really felt God call you to ministry.
Maybe about a month ago, I was in Wisconsin, not too terribly far from there. And I thought about going and trying to find, it was when I was in Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo wasn't too far from there.
Yeah.
That was earlier this year. But anyway, one last funny story before we get to the meat of this. And that is when you first showed up as our youth pastor, I've been gone from the church for a little while. And my family came back to the church, and I come in, and you're not there yet, but Ashley, your wife, is.
Yeah.
And she's over at the
better part of the deal.
What?
The better part of the deal.
Yeah, and she, so much so that I went over to the where she was at the piano, and I thought, this is a new youth group girl, and I try to date all the youth group girls. That's just how it works. And so, but it's the new youth pastor's wife. Who knew?
Well, there you go. We're right. Young looking. What can I say?
She is. Yeah. All right. So after you left there as youth pastor, I became youth pastor at that church. As a matter of fact, You went to pastor in Georgia, and
I went to Missouri first, and then I ended up in Georgia. So it was Missouri, Georgia, Tennessee, and now Ohio.
Because Missouri was your home state, right?
It's where my family, my parents came from Missouri in that area. Yeah.
Okay.
That was it. And,
I'm thinking now about some stories that I don't think you would want to tell on here about on the way up to the Grand Rapids trip, I think was where we stopped at this church that let us stay there and sleep in their gymnasium. And on the half court.
That was in Missouri. That was the Red Star Baptist Church in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. We slept in their gym for a week.
Are you still friends with those people?
Beth, with Red Star, those churches are still there. I know them because that's where a lot of my family is tied to. We were working with what was Bethany Church. That was the church that my grandparents and aunts and uncles and everybody were tied to. That church.
The reason I bring it up, JD, is because I didn't want to say anything that would be offensive, because I'm sure that church is a wonderful church, and I'm sure those are wonderful people. And so this is no aspersion on them at all. This casts aspersions on stupid young boys in a youth group.
But I think I know what you're going to say.
We slept on a pentagram. The center of the basketball court was a pentagram.
Baptist Church. They had a gymnasium, and where the center was of the basketball court, in that circle, they put a red star. And so it kind of had a pentagram look to it, which was a little unnerving for her to sleep in the Baptist church. And, I don't,
And so we called it Fellowship Devil Church after that. But anyway, on with your story. So
I'm not that close to them, so it's okay.
Yeah, you're not that close with the good folks at Fellowship Devil Church in Missouri. All right. Well, but now you're pastoring a sizable church in Dublin, Ohio. Is that right?
That's right. Northwest corner of Columbus. So that's kind of where we are.
And you've been there for several years.
Yeah. About 6.5 years now. Yeah.
So now at this point, so you've got there are enough people in this church. I mean, it's kind of tough because when it comes to numbers, like when you're in a smaller church, numbers seem to fluctuate more because when they fluctuate, you feel it a lot more. But at the same time, you're at a good sized church to really get a pulse on what churches are dealing with, because you can kind of get a sense of what the bigger churches might have to go through, as well as some of the smaller churches, because people still know each other and things like that. So as you're coming out, I mean, we've seen all the videos about what churches are going through and all that, but as we're coming out of it now, what are your thoughts on how this is affecting the culture or the church or how we deal with it? What? And by the way,
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't say this, but
we're
you
gonna
can
look
feel
back on
free
this.
to push any ministry or program you've got going on right now as well as you start.
Well, we'll talk about some of the things we find that connect with people and really are helping us with ministry. But I think we're going to look back on this time and it's just going to be one of those huge historical mile markers. I've got 2 kids. I expect when they finally have kids of their own and grandkids, they'll tell them, "Oh yeah, I went through the pandemic. I went through, that time period. I went through COVID." And they'll be like, "Really, Grandpa, what was it like?" And so
It's
this is going to be
historic,
one of
isn't
those
it?
moments. It's historic. There's no way around it. The whole world stopped for a significant amount of time. And you just don't do something like that without it being a historical mile marker or milestone of some sort of point. I think we're all being futurists and trying to figure out, so where do we go from here? We throw around a lot of different language, stuff like, what is the new normal, as if there was ever a normal before. But we talk about those things like we want to get back to what's comfortable. But there's really not an ability to go back because this is too monumental to go back to what it was. And so we're all going to make these shifts. And the church is part of this shift that's going to occur. And I think it really has been, it's been incredibly difficult. Every pastor I meet, every church I know, everywhere I go, everybody has a different story and yet the same story. They all have been through an incredibly difficult time. They've lost people, they've lost resources, they've lost members, they've lost fellowship, and they're desperate to do something in that void, but they're not quite sure what that something is. And so there's this feeling of this coming out of a loss, and it creates a sort of desperation. We're desperate to get back. We're desperate to reclaim something, and I don't think the Western Church, United States, that kind of our Christianity has been desperate in a long time. We've really been comfortable, and we've kind of glided on comfort and ease, and had all that, and I really think there's a group of people who have stayed with the church and are committed to it. And there's a new core that is forming for most churches that really wants to recapture something of what it means to be the church. There's a new heartbeat for evangelism. There's a new heartbeat for reaching our communities. There's a real heartbeat to say, but how does this gospel really impact our lives and change us? And so I think we're going to see the church be smaller, but stronger. But I think it's also going to have to survive in a world that is going to be less friendly to the church or less friendly to Christianity.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that in the midst of that, you've got like the progressive church movement where they really are going after numbers. It's not like evangelicals in general are not going after numbers. But a part of our thinking, obviously, and you kind of just articulated this indirectly, is that, I mean, we don't get us wrong. We want as many people in the church as will possibly be in the church. God wants to save everyone, but we don't want numbers at the expense of things that we consider to be central issues, doctrinal issues and things like that. Earlier this year, I was responding to an atheist who's kind of a friend of mine, a female atheist, and she was saying something like, her name's Shannon Q, people will know. And she was saying something like, if you guys wanted your churches to stop bleeding and you wanted your churches to grow, maybe change your message. She didn't say change your message, but she said something like lay off the gays or or maybe don't have that message toward gays, was basically the idea. And that is tough, because that's got to be like one of the biggest hindrances to the modern mind with accepting a message like ours, is biblical sexuality and what it means, and all those kind of things. And not to suck all the wind out of the room, I'm here to hear from you, but I do think that that's a true thing that, she said maybe you should lay off the gay type thing. Well, this plays on the notion that what we want is as many warm bodies in buildings as we can possibly get. And we do, provided that they believe, right?
But we also live in a world where popularity equates with truth. So the more people I have that agree with me, then I must be right. So popularity validates my version of truth. And so we have these cultures in conflict, right? So as biblical Christians, we believe one thing about, what God says about, our sexuality or whatever that issue is, whether it's homosexuality or abortion or any of those like hot button controversial topics. We believe one thing. You got a world over here that believes something else. And it's very easy to say, well, how do we kind of accommodate the world or sound like the world? And maybe by sounding like that, maybe those people will think we're okay and come over to where we are. And yet the heartbeat of the gospel is really about a transformational experience. It's about changing us where we leave the world, this other culture, to enter into this relationship with Christ that becomes a whole new culture. And suddenly our life is transformed and changed. And I think that's really where the church is going to discover its voice. You could look at Acts, you can look through history, all kinds of times. But the church, for some reason, is incredibly strong when it's persecuted. It finds its voice and it stands in a unique way. And I think there's a type of shaking, a type of refining that's going on in many churches where God is preparing us for something of that very nature. And so the church reclaiming its voice to say, but the gospel is about something so totally different than the world that we do look different, we act different, we think different. Yes, we are not like you, but we get to explain why and how that changes us.
Well, it makes sense to think about COVID and what it's done to the church. I mean, right now our church is going through a series called Heard It All Before-isms, or Heard It All Before syndrome, or whatever, where you've heard all these stories like the feeding of the 5,000, the prodigal son, all these things. And so you just kind of brush over it. Well, I know all that stuff. I know, I get the message. I know. And you miss some of the great truths that are there. And I think as we kind of look at this period of history, we are, COVID is so much in the news. Like we've heard more about COVID in the past year and a half, let's say, than I would wager we heard about certain things our entire lives. And so it's all recent, it's all focused, it's all acute. And I think it's sensible for us to step back from that and say, yeah, I've heard everything. It's everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. But where does it sit kind of in the history of the church? Where does it sit in the history of the American church for those of us that live in America? And of course, you can make the proper appropriation wherever you do live. But that's a relevant question. And so I've run into some churches, JD, where they say they've actually, I know one church that says they actually have better numbers now than before COVID, but they know that's rare. They know that's unusual. Most of the churches that I've heard from, they say we're getting back to what it was. We're not anywhere near there yet. And I know that my pastor has said, what is surprising to me, that for many churches, the finances weren't as much of a problem. Obviously they were for a lot of churches. For some, they weren't, because there were givers who made sure that they did give to make up for it, because they saw it, they kind of recognized this as a problem. And I'd like to know how that went at your church. But it's as we look at this, there are some churches that would say, like my pastor, well, the people that have come back are not necessarily the people I thought would come back. And the people that are here now, we've got some people I've never seen before. We've got some people that came back that I thought would not come back. And the people that I thought for sure would come back, they're not back. Are you seeing that kind of thing?
It is a really hard thing to define who's coming back, why they're coming back, all of that. It's all unusual. It's you can't predict it, is what it is. for most churches, ours are one of those that we kind of fall into this. You always had that 20-80 rule, 20% of the people carrying 80% of the load. And that was true with your finances too, there were a lot of people that attended church that didn't tithe or give regularly. They would put some money in a plate every once in a while, but they weren't regular givers. They weren't really committed givers. And as such, their contribution financially was somewhat minimal. That's what we're seeing. I mean, we've dropped a bit in our giving, but only about 10% overall.
Wow.
But we're like 30% down in attendance right now. So a huge number of that group really weren't that financially committed. And you think about it, the people that will give to your church believe in your church. And they're buying into wanting to be the church and wanting to see the church do missions and ministry. We're seeing it's a strange trade-off. Not all our people have come back, but there's this new wave of all these new faces that have never been here before. We have more guests than we've ever had. And the issue is, I think they're looking for relationship. I think the shift that the church really has here, the opportunity, is to promote what a relationship with Christ really means. What's it mean to really know Jesus and that relationship? And then the relationship within the church with one another, this body that's like a family, and that longing for that. You think I don't know what it was like where you were, but we went into COVID and we were told, 3 or 4 weeks, we'll shut down, we'll kind of all isolate, and then it'll be fine. And 3 or 4 weeks turned into 2 or 3 months, and 2 or 3 months turned into a year, and 18 months later, here we are. And science kept saying, this, that, and the other. And I know that there were things scientifically that were there, and I don't want to discredit that. But honestly, this was something science had never seen before, and they couldn't really speak to it. Not conclusively. They were making their best educated guesses, but they were still making educated guesses. And what we learned was science didn't know everything. We've got a culture that is very mystical and spiritual in its nature. It's looking for something bigger than itself. You got all kinds of crazy stuff that you can watch as far as, all the ghost hunting shows. You can watch, Curse of Oak Island. You can watch Skinwalker Ranch. You can watch all these sort of shows about, what if there's something more out there? What if something mysterious is going on? Or what if there's more than we know?
I bet you are totally into Skinwalker Ranch, aren't you?
I'm watching Skinwalker Ranch right now. I'm still waiting for Oak Island to pull something up too. So I'm into all that. Of course, we were in the era of X-Files. So we grew up with the original conspiracy theory. The truth is out there, and I want to believe. So we grew up with all that.
Yeah. But the truth is out there. So the Skinwalker Ranch is one thing, but Oak Island I heard about on a podcast about a year before the show. And I thought it was the most amazing story. Not that we're going to go off talking about Oak Island, but then I watched the show, and every episode they just be leading me on, man. They found something.
And another thing was that whole finding Bigfoot. My wife says we ought to say that it's a walk in the woods to talk about Bigfoot because we never find anything. But this whole mystical thing, Oak Island is like the seedbed for conspiracy theory. I mean, from Freemasons to, the wars to all this. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff tied to it. And it is something that we are searching for something. As humans, we innately know there's something bigger than me. Yeah. And we wonder what it is. I think, the culture I see coming up, like the back end of the millennials, the Gen Z, they're highly relational and small group relational. So you've got this moment where the church can say, we're not going to discredit science, but we also don't think science has all the answers. We know you're searching for something bigger than yourself, and we know you crave a relationship. It kind of reminds me of Paul being on Mars Hill saying, I see all these gods, and you worship all these gods, and you even have one to an unknown God. Well, let me help you. I know the unknown God. You're looking for all these things. You're searching for all these things. Let me help you. I know where all of it comes together, and it comes together when you know Jesus.
Amen. JD, as you were just so eloquently putting that, I found something I want to share with you. This
Oh my
is
goodness.
a picture of me. Can you name these people?
Absolutely. That's you. That's who that is.
Yeah.
Well, you and absolutely. I listen, that was a monumental time in my life too. And so I'll never forget, all of you.
Oh
It was
man.
a special time.
You
I
know,
don't, it looks like, I don't know what that is in the background. I'm trying to figure out where that was taken.
I'm going to tell you where it was taken. Okay, you got the background in mind?
It's
You got
cinder brick wall and
cinder
something hung
block
up on you.
and a net up on the wall. Yeah. That was
Was that a
actually the
VBS?
trip. That was actually the trip where I surrendered to the gospel
Was
ministry.
that? Okay.
And they were on that trip, and the reason there was a net up behind us there and stickers all over me is because we were doing VBS during the day for their kids at the church and in the area.
Well, it looked like a VBS setup, but I didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
So that's
That
me.
was a
And you
few years ago.
what you couldn't tell from that picture is I had long hair back then. I used to have a beautiful mane of long hair. Those days are
Yeah,
over.
God makes a few perfect heads and the rest he covers up with hair.
Amen. Amen. Truer words have never been spoken. So, JD, as we look at we know the bad of COVID. Obviously, it's done horrible things. I mean, obviously people have died, but it's also separated people from family who are in hospice or assisted living. It's done damage to the church. And as we look at the church here, I've noticed at least a couple of positives that I think have come out of this. You kind of mentioned one, which is that we're seeing new faces, right? We're seeing people that maybe didn't consider church before. And maybe that's because of this other positive that I've noticed, that there's always going to be preachers come out and say that God brought these kind of tragedies on the world because of homosexuality and abortion or something. But and then those same guys have to come out and apologize a week later, because how do they know that's what God was thinking? That's like the grandma fallacy. We're like, my grandma comes out and tells me stop doing jump rope, and I just keep jumping rope, and she says, come in, it's time to eat dinner, and I just keep jumping rope. Finally I bust my nose, and she's like, see, that's God doing that to you because you wouldn't listen to your grandma. Well, that's the grandma fallacy. It may well be that that's what happened, but my grandma's not in a position to know that. And that's what these preachers do. It could well be that God is doing something, but they don't know that he's necessarily bringing a direct judgment because of a particular thing. But that said, he can redeem goods in the midst of bad things that happen, why ever they're happening. And one thing that I think he's doing here is this has kind of forced a lot of mid-sized churches and smaller churches to get their technology kind of up to speed and be prepared to do online ministry.
Yeah. I mean,
Have you all felt that?
it pushed us. Absolutely.
And you were already doing it because you already had those Facebook videos where you'd kind of keep everyone up to date, but you're kind of a forward-thinking guy.
We did Facebook, but as far as our sanctuary, we really didn't have the equipment to do, our worship services and stream that. And so we were able to do that, and we started to do that. And it's been a great outreach. It definitely gives us a chance to present, the gospel, to put those services out there so anybody can see them, at any time and be able to do that. That's a great benefit. But I think the church still has to figure out about technology, how we actually connect with people. I think, the worship service is great, but there's got to be a way where we really connect with people. And, we do several different ministries here of, like divorce care and grief share and things like that for people who are in these kind of crisis moments of life where they can be with a group of other people going through the same thing. The leaders of those groups are people that have been through it. So, have a male and female that lead those classes. And so for divorce care, both of those people have been through a divorce, and, it was years ago. They're on the other side, and they've kind of gotten, through it all healthy and whole and ready to help some other people. With my grief share, both of those individuals have lost a spouse, and they understand that. So they can kind of relate to the people that are there. They know what it's like to walk through that. But they were able to use Zoom and various things to keep those classes connected. And awesome. That became an opportunity that they didn't lose that contact. And once you build that relationship, technology is great. I mean, I love that we can do this. I mean, you're there in Indiana, I'm in Ohio, and we're doing an interview, which is really kind of unusual to me. That's not exactly how I grew up doing interviews, and it's great. But what I would really love is to be able to be in a room with you, because there's nothing quite like, in-person stuff.
Being
So
in a room with me.
Well, that too. Yeah. I've been in a room with you and
You've been in
listened to
some
you
rooms.
snore. So,
You've been in some rooms with me and about 20 other dudes that were pretty smelly rooms.
well, once you get together 20 teenagers, it doesn't take long for the room to be smelly. So that can happen pretty quickly. But there's no replacing the personal connection. It's a great bridge in between and offers a lot, but there's no replacing that personal connection.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else about this topic in particular that you feel like you really wanted to say that you didn't get to say yet?
I think I would just say this, to other pastors who are in those situations where you're fighting through it. Just persevere. I think God's doing something. It may take us a while to get to the other side, but God is doing something. So I'm working on some sermon stuff, and I was working with this Greek word of abide, meno. And what I found was interesting. The word persevere is hupermeno or hypermeno. It's the ability to remain somewhere when everything else around you is difficult. That's persevering. And so God has you in the place He wants you, even in the difficulty and the stuff that's around it. And persevering is saying to God, well, if this is where you want me, then this is where I'll stay. I'll just stay right here and trust you. And so we're persevering as the church. We're going through a season of change. I think God's going to bring something on the other side, but we just need to stay faithful here, because I think something amazing is going to happen on the other side.
Well, on the one hand, JD, I think if I was pastoring, so I'm trying to put myself back in the mindset that I had when I was pastoring. And of course I had only a fraction of the pastoral experience that you have. But when I was going through that, I was very numbers oriented. I think that I think that the kind of person, let me put it this way. I think the kind of person that can become really fixated on numbers as a pastor or in ministry, or maybe just in business in general, is the kind of person that has the kind of wiring that I think God has wired that person up to do a certain job. So I don't necessarily think that if you're the type of pastor like I was, who really is paying a close attention to those numbers, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think that an unhealthy way of thinking about those numbers can be bad. I had an unhealthy way of thinking about it. I felt like I was chained to that pulpit, and if the numbers were down, I was down. If the numbers were up, I was up. Yeah. And what were you going to say about that?
If you live by the numbers, well, then, Monday is either the greatest day ever or the most depressing day ever, depending on what Sunday looks like. Right. I think the numbers, a good way I've always thought about the numbers, is kind of like a doctor. He'll take my temperature, he'll take my blood pressure, he'll do things like that. There's numbers involved. If those numbers are off, they tell him something's off, but they don't tell him what the problem is. That's where his expertise has to come in, and he has to do the diagnosis. If your numbers are down for a consistent time, you got to ask the question, well, why? Why are those numbers down? But it didn't answer the question.
And I think, like, when I was pastoring with that unhealthy way that I viewed the numbers, I think on the one hand, when COVID happened and the whole dynamic of the church changed, on the one hand, that'd be devastating because obviously you have terrible numbers. But then, and this is me like saying as a young pastor, this is like everything about this is the wrong way to think. But I might have like felt a little relief, honestly. That's horrible because people are dying and stuff. So I don't mean to take away from that. But I might have felt a little bit of like career relief, that it's like, okay, I don't really have to worry about numbers as much for a little while because everybody's got bad numbers. Yeah.
It is comforting to be around other pastors and say, okay, so it's not just me. It's good to know. I'm not a bad pastor. This is the world we're in right now. And that has a certain encouragement to it. Absolutely.
But a fear of, do I have a way to provide going forward? Right.
Yeah, there is that. And that's part of a pastor's heart, is we wrestle with that. We don't, again, you talked about numbers. Yeah, we want to see people, but it's not for numbers so we can say, see, and listen, we grew up in this Baptist denomination where it was all about nickels and noses, and it was bodies and buildings and budget and baptisms. We count everything, and we really do see somebody who has high numbers. We say, well, they must know what they're doing. They know how to get high numbers. That doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're doing. Some of the most godly men who serve as pastors are in small churches and out of the way places that aren't ever going to have big numbers. They're never going to be that person that, is going to be invited to the world conference tour type of thing. But they've also found in that this satisfaction of doing what God's called them to do and seeing lives get changed one person at a time. And there's a joy in that. I don't know if that's the word I want to use with it, but there's a contentment, a purpose, a fulfillment in doing that.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things else I want to talk to you about that don't have anything to do with COVID or church as it has existed over the past year. What many people would not know about you, even some people perhaps who know you might not know about you, is that you, I think, went to Belmont to study something to do with drama and acting and that sort of thing, right?
Belmont, I double majored. I did religion and theater. That was my double major there.
And then you went on, and then of course you went to Trinity, but I think you went to Southern at some point, didn't you? Southern
Belmont, Theological Southern Trinity. That was the equation there. And just to say, Trinity was a great education because it did fuse practicality with it. It made me think, not only did I learn stuff, I had to answer this question. So how will you use that? What will you do with that? How does that impact your ministry? And that was a whole practical point of it that just really blossomed out and helped that, that PhD take on a whole new life. It just was part of the what Trinity offered. It was that I didn't get in other places.
Yeah. Well, I want to, hey, there were some, and this was a time when Nashville had some really big voices, like Jerry Sutton, who was at Two Rivers for a long time, was there. Yeah. Billy Friel out at First Baptist Church, Mount Juliet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you had Park Avenue and what was happening at Park Avenue. But you came to Park Avenue as a youth pastor, and so you ended up writing two plays.
I did. I wrote 2 dramas. Yeah.
And you
had a team. I wrote them, but we had a team that helped produce them. Yeah.
And you insisted that I play the lead role, the most important role. I mean, I'm not even sure many of the other roles mattered that much.
Well, I built it around you. That was all. I sat down and said, gee, what could we do that would make Braxton have center stage? Oh, by the way, we'll talk about Jesus too.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people who mean the most to me are people who really care about me a lot. So, but when we play, so this was called
astounding.
So you wrote this, play called Lucifer's Lies, and I remember you actually had a quote from my dad, Harold Hunter, on the back of the flyer.
Yes, I did.
And who, by the way,
he was with us on Sunday. We put up a tent, did an old-fashioned revival. He preached, and he talked about this. He used the quote on Sunday. I don't think he even knew that connection, but he used the quote on Sunday morning. The worst thing about being deceived is you never know you're deceived.
Yeah. If you knew the worst thing about being deceived is you didn't know you're deceived. If you knew you were deceived, you wouldn't be deceived to begin with, right? Something like that.
Right.
Well, but so I played like this drug addict kid who gets in trouble, and you were the cool Holy Spirit in a leather jacket and jeans and white T-shirt who would try to influence. The whole thing was set up around demonic versus spiritual, like positive spiritual influence.
It was set up much like the world we're in now, as we realize that there are unseen things at work that are godly and demonic. What does that look like? If you could see the unseen world, what would it look like?
So we had a guy in our church who owned a suit shop in Green Hills. And
David Garris.
Anyone who's familiar with Nashville knows that Green Hills is the ritzy side of town. And he owned a suit shop in the ritzy side of town. And he looked like a ritzy kind of guy, didn't he? And
well, he had a high-end men's clothing suit store. And so, you had to dress that part. I mean, that's your job. You had to dress like that.
And
I
he had
mean,
the
if
really
you walked
red
around in blue
hair.
jeans and a t-shirt and said, "Yeah, I sell you fancy suits," nobody would believe it.
Right. But he had really red hair, and he just looked. He's like he was, and so he played Satan.
You know how that began. So there was
How?
another drama going on where you had the devil down in hell, and people, at judgment, when they went to hell, he jumped out of hell and laughed and drug them down there and everything. And I just was like, theologically, that is so wrong. Hell is the last place Satan wants to be. And so I don't want hell to be presented as his kingdom where he rules. And, he has this sadomasochistic thing of just torturing people down there. And
Yeah.
I really wanted our Satan to be scared of hell. And I didn't want him to be that caricature of the red horns and the pitchfork.
No,
and
we
so
had a
we
good.
made him a businessman. And his business was to upset God's business. That's all he was doing. Yeah.
That's like a great phrase that you just said, our Satan. What I wanted for our Satan. I believe in our Satan. So anyway,
Well,
you had that.
yeah.
And so he would whisper lies, hence the name of the play, Lucifer's Lies. He would whisper lies into certain characters' ears. And then the Holy Spirit, played by James Davis here. I mean, why go out for burgers when you got steak at home here? Why look for another actor? And then the actors would, either listen or not, but they had their influences there. Well, one night of this play, the guy who played God, is this guy named Larry. I guess he played Jesus.
Larry Weathers. He played Jesus. Yeah.
I mean, if it's a physical representation of God, it's Jesus.
We did the Easter drama every year, and he played Jesus every year. So, I mean, come on. I mean, he looked the part. You had to put him in there. He looked like,
the problem with that,
Da
JD,
Vinci's
is
Jesus.
When these kids grow up now who are my age, they think that Jesus died at 57 because that's how old that guy looked. But anyway, all right. So you got that guy and his wife, Larry and Belinda Weathers. And they were one of those couples that really cares about the youth group. They're always kind of hovering around the youth group and looking for ways to help and stuff. And they knew all the kids and loved all the kids. And so one night they asked me and some of my friends, maybe let's, well, I won't put it back up, but maybe a couple of Brent and Sarah, who we saw a moment ago, might have been a couple of the ones that went with us over to their house that night after we did the play. And they made cookies for us and all that stuff. But what we had planned was we were going to each one at different moments. There was like 3 of us. We would slip out to go to the bathroom, but we wouldn't go to the bathroom. We'd slip out the front door and go roll the house while we're in there eating their cookies. And so
that was the kind of youth group I led,
Yeah, but I do remember this time. And so anyway, we did all that. We all rolled the house when we left. And the next night at practice, there came a point in the play where you make all your life decisions and then your character goes to stand at some sort of a judgment sort of scenario. And so I'm before Jesus, and Jesus says the lines that he says in the play. I don't remember my character's name, maybe Michael or something. He says, "Michael, I've watched you all your life. I've watched you as you've developed into the young man that you are. I watched you last night from my bathroom window as you rolled my house."
I remember that. But it was Larry and Belinda, though, who really said, "Hey, I think we need to change something at the end," because we do an invitation, we do an invitational moment. And they said, "I think we need to have Braxton give the ending." And, I was the one doing the invitation at the end, but we switched it up. You took it over and did far better with it than anybody else. And it was like, well, there you go. The son of an evangelist, he knows how to do that. It became your part and you took it over.
Well, I appreciate that. It was a blast. It was a fun, but I also remember your wife getting upset because you really strategically made a terrible decision by buying a house like a block from the church, not even a block from the church, because you got rolled and whatever that thing is where they put the paper plates and then put a fork through it.
We got
forked, I guess.
All that was fine. It was when they put the Dawn dishwashing detergent all over the concrete porch that it became, it took me weeks to get all that soapy stuff off there. And
I remember Ashley crying
about it. it all foamed up and spilled out, and it killed all the bushes in the front of the house. So I mean, yeah, that was the one thing she was like, I'm going to kill those kids. But we bought several houses. That's the only house we ever made money on, was that house.
That house, we don't need to talk numbers, but that house you probably bought for less than $100,000.
You're right. I bought it at 98.
Okay.
Right at 100.
Me and Sarah in about 2014, so this is a long time ago, drove past it and it was for sale. And so we called and priced it, and that house was worth over $400,000.
What?
Yeah.
I sold it soon. Wow. So I'm not the only person who's made money on that house, because I can tell you, I was nowhere near 400,000 when I sold it.
You were just a meager youth pastor. Oh, yeah. Man. Well, and then just to cap everything off, toward the end of our time together before you left the church as youth pastor, I was out of the youth group by 1 year and was serving as kind of like your assistant.
Yeah, you were an assistant, intern. You were helping.
Yeah, I was an intern.
We brought you in.
And I played guitar, and we would lead the worship together.
I moved to bass, days, and you took over guitar.
I miss those days.
Oh, those were fun days. Those were great days. And again, it's what we remember. It's the time together. It's the fellowship. It's that relationship. And that's what I think the church has to recapture is, we've made it about programs. We've made it about numbers. We've made it about, cool lights or whatever it is, trying to attract people in. And I think what they really want is something that changes their life, is bigger than themselves, and they could really have a real relationship with. And the church has all that.
Well, I'll tell you, you were definitely the type of youth pastor that did let us know you cared about us and really got involved in our lives. And even when it wasn't pleasant, I remember one night, me and a girlfriend I had were parked some lover's lane somewhere in around Centennial Park. And I see you walking up over this hill in front of us. And you were out looking to bust one of the youth group kids who was out at some lover's lane. And me and my girlfriend on this particular night, we weren't doing anything wrong. And I guess you sensed that because I didn't get busted. But you were the kind of youth pastor who would go out and leave the 99, right? To go after the one. Even when the one wasn't lost out here or wasn't aware that he was lost, he was off making out with some other sheep. And you would leave and go find him and kick him in the butt and bring him back to the fold. That's what you did. That's how I think of you as a youth pastor.
Well, the butt kicking shepherd. That's what I was. Yeah.
That's you. That's put it on a t-shirt.
I cared about you. I really did. And that was it. Yeah. Sometimes it was, those days we didn't have kids. It was just Ashley and I. And people would say, don't you want to have kids? And I would say, why? I've got 60 of them. I don't need any more. And that's how, it was kind of felt like, you're my kids. I'm not going to let you go screw up your life. Come on.
And Ashley was a big part of that whole ministry too. And I'm not just saying that to work her in because, there were, even after I was out, like, I guess I was out of the youth group before you left. You had left Park Avenue, but you hadn't left the area yet or something. And there was a long time where I would come and hang out with you and Ashley would give advice on things going on in my life. And I just loved you both. And I've always kind of seen you as a spiritual sort of big brother. And you're coach. Hey, coach, you're coach. And so I'm glad we finally got you on here.
Well, you're always going to be Braxtonian, so there's nobody else.
Well, and honestly, I don't know how many people will watch this video to the end because we're just talking about our stuff, but in a sort of
the only people going to watch it to the end is people tied to Park Avenue or that youth group going, well, are they going to talk about me?
There's a Joy Explosion, which was the name of our youth group before we were there. There's a Joy Explosion Facebook group. And it has a bunch of it has a bunch of the old picture of the one before us, but then they accidentally put some of ours in there. That's where I got the picture I put up a while ago. So I'll put this video in there.
Look.
Huh?
I'm gonna have to go through that Facebook page and look.
Yeah, I'll put this in there. I'll try to share it around. But yeah, who does need to be named? Audrey needs to be named.
Audrey still calls me. Audrey stays in touch. Connie and Brent.
Connie keeps up with me. Jenny, Sarah, Adam. Elizabeth, David.
Yeah.
There's a lot. There's a lot of Adam Ragsdale. Yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan Bain. Remember him?
Jonathan Bain. Yep.
Yeah.
Good times. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to be respectful of your time, JD.
Oh.
And I know you've got something else you got coming up, but listen, man, it's really meant a lot to me that you came on here, and we'll have you on again sometime. And, but just for our audience, if anybody cares, this is a person who has impacted me greatly. And if you think, well, hey, I admire this channel and I'm getting something out of this channel, and if Braxton says this guy's legit, he's legit. If you're willing to give me that kind of trust, is there a place like on the website? Can they watch your sermons?
You can go to our website. It's dublinbaptist.com. The sermons are linked there, and you can do that. But we have a YouTube channel, and we have a Facebook page where they're posted as well. And so you can do that and keep up with us that way.
I'll link all of this stuff is linked in the description if you're watching this video. And so go check it out. I mean, sometimes you need you need it, especially right now while we're missing out on church, but in general, you need to get good preaching in. And I don't think one time or twice a week is enough. So this is the kind of person. I've wore out a couple of sermons I got from when you preached at Park Avenue. One was on David. I'll never forget. It was all about David, his whole life. And there was, mainly that's the one that I remember, but there were others.
I preached 2 or 3 times. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but no, I love that. I could even quote part of it to you. You talk about Samuel going to try to find the new king for Israel, and David comes in, and, David, he's ruddy, the Bible says. He's like one of those little kids that's been outside all day, little dirt always on his face. This is the way you said it. And I loved it because you were good at painting pictures with words. And when you're doing public speaking, that's about all you got, unless you're doing something weird with PowerPoint or something. So,
you're special too. I'm proud of you because look at you, president of Trinity Seminary, and doing the apologetics. And you're doing great. It's like, hey, those days made a difference in somebody's life. And it's great to see what God's doing with you. And so
I appreciate
kudos to you.
All right. You're a Southern Baptist pastor. The Southern Baptists have just elected Ed Litton. Is the sky falling, or is this the greatest day ever, or is it somewhere in between?
I honestly don't know much about Ed Litton. So I don't really know where it is. I do. Earlier we talked about, the cultures colliding and trying maybe to appeal a little bit too much to the world. I think we have to stay true to who we are, that, we are people of the Bible. We are people that believe the gospel changes people's lives. We believe that people need a relationship with Jesus. And once you have a relationship with Jesus, everything changes. Mm-hmm. And that's who we are. That means that at times, we conflict with the world, but that's just who we are.
Well, JD, you are definitely doing a wonderful work out there, I know. And there are I represent one of many other people who benefited from your ministry to the degree that I did. And so I appreciate you so much. And I will look for something else to have you back on, because I like just having you. Half the topics on this show are just excuses to have a show.
Well, we'll talk about something. We'll find something else to talk about, and we'll do it again.
All right, man. Well, I love you so much. And listen, if you're out there watching, remember to subscribe, share this video around, like it. Check out JD's resources. Follow his sermons. Maybe there's a particular issue in your life. And the great thing about pastors putting their sermons online today is you can maybe go find a series that you like that he's done in the past and really just binge on that stuff. But thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time on Trinity Radio.